B4D Tools 1.4.2 Quick Guide of Changes. Language compatibility. Now the add-on is compatible with any language of Blender. Let's see the interface changes. The instance's position, rotation, and scale output attributes have been removed. The parameters have been moved to a new panel called Parameters. Per step and endpoint modes now have a menu selection. The ID asset, render instances, randomize assets, random seed have been reorganized. The randomize assets have been added to the new clones mode. Here you can choose between iterate, random, blend and sort modes. The render instances have been placed in the new instance mode. On BCloner transform node, the material options have been moved to a new panel called Material. The fall-off parameters of every effector have been moved to a new node called Basic Fields. Here you can see the same parameters with new options like radial and factor fall-off field parameters. When you add any effector, this node will be added automatically to have a user-soft transition. The minute and max parameters have been moved to a panel called Minute Max. The parameters have been moved to a new panel called Parameters. The other parameters have been moved to a new panel called Other. Important updates. The effector delay had been refactored. Now it works better, is easier to understand, and is more similar to the Cinema 4D. So try it and tell me if you find something to improve it or a bug. Let's see the new main features. All BCloners now have a menu to choose between different BCloner modes, as I mentioned before. One of the new features is the blend mode. For the moment you can use only 2 original assets. Remember that the performance is quite slow, but you can use the new bake node for the complex blend morphs. So let's see how it works. Add a plane and subdivide it a few times. Rename it as plane_base and duplicate it. Add a modifier simple deform and set the angle to 90 degrees. Rename the duplicated mesh as plane_deformed. Add any object and add the BCloner. For example, I choose the BCloner linear. Create a collection and rename it as assets_to_blend_mode. You can use the drop your assets collection as well. Move both planes to this collection. Put that collection in the collection parameter and active use collection. Change the count to 6. Change the clones mode to blend. Here you can see all instances morph between the first and last asset. Add a plane effector. You can use another effector if you want, and reset the position parameters of plane. Go to the other panel and move the modify clone parameter. As you see, all instances will be changed to the first one. This will work the same with random and sort modes. In blend mode, you can see the deformation will be applied for all instances when this parameter is 100%. If you want to use a field to control this deformation, go to the basic fields and activate linear field. Use the empty controller to control the effector, in this case, the deformation on each instance. If you want a smooth transition, you can scale the controller and add more instances. Here you can see an example. New workflow, new field system, nodes workflow. Let's see the old workflow versus the new workflow so you can understand how it works now and how flexible it is compared to the old workflow. I use the Geometry Nodes editor to show it better. On B4D Tools 1.4.1, first you need to set the BCloner node, then the BCloner transform node and finally the effector node. On B4D Tools 1.4.2, first you need to set the BCloner node, then the BCloner transform node, then the basic fields node and finally the effector node. With this, you have the same setup as mentioned before, but now you can add between basic fields and effector, all fields and modifier fields nodes and combine them with the blending mode options. How to work the other fields. As I mentioned before, you can add any field or modifier field between basic fields and the effector node. Here I add a random and formula field as an example. Add-on workflow. Let's see the new workflow in action with the add-on. The basic setup is the same. First I added a bcloner grid array and then I added the plane effector. The add-on automatically adds the bcloner transform and the basic fields modifier and sets the correct order. Now you can select the type of field. By default is infinite. I choose the linear field as an example. Then I scale the empty controller. This empty is created automatically. I change the Z position parameter. In the remapping panel, you can control the inner falloff, invert, minute, max, clamp and soft falloff. I change to 0 the inner falloff parameter. Then I add a random field. Move one slot up the modifier and as you see the random effector works. Again you have the remapping parameters if you need it. And in the blending mode panel you have normal, minute, subtract, multiply, overlay, max, add, screen, clip options. Finally you have render field check. With this option in render mode you can see the result of field is applied. Keep in mind that this option is only to check the result. The overlay is the best option to accumulate fields, but feel free to experiment with the other blending modes. Random field has some options: random, noise and Voronoi. Now I add the modifier curve field. Again moving one slot up. Some nodes must change to Geometry Nodes Editor to modify parameters, like this one. Go to Geometry Nodes Editor and find the red frame tab in the green node group, and now you can change the float curve. For example, I created a simple curve. You can see how affects and keeps the field added before. The difference between fields and modifiers fields is that the modifiers fields serve to modify or adjust the current field. Remember you can use the empty controller to animate the field. New bcloner tool, split to instances. With this modifier, you can use effectors again after the material tools or realize instances modifiers. Here you can see an example. This gives you more flexibility. Keep in mind that the node produces slow performance, so maybe you need to use the bake node. Display instances index. Now you can check the index number of instances in the menu called Display. Keep in mind this viewer performance is slower, so use it only when you need it. This menu is available in the bcloner transform node and the bimograph selection node. New bcloner instance mode. Here you can choose between instance, render instances and multi-instance. The instance is by default. Render instances convert the instances to real geometry. And the multi-instance you can choose. The off option doesn't show anything. Points create a point per instance, matrix creates a small cube per instance, bounding box shows a cube with the size of every instance and the object is the original object itself. For complex assets, this gives a better performance in the viewport. New preferences add-on, link to the documentation. In the add-on preferences, now you can check all video documentation. In the documentation button, click and your web browser opens with the playlist video documentation. Because this update has a lot of changes, the video documentation will be updated in the coming weeks, so keep it in mind. Also, you can check the PDF changelog for every change. Thank you so much for your support and enjoy these tools.